Before plantfluencers and glossy plant shops and nurseries, there were people swapping ferns in coffee shops, mailing cuttings across continents, and documenting plant care on a dial-up internet. I know we all hear the sound. This is going to be the story of the unsung heroes of the houseplant world. Essentially, the Houseplant Underground that kept the passion and intrigue of the jungle alive way before it got cool. Stick around with me and let's dive into it. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So yes, today I want to do a bit of a dive into the unsung heroes slash the history of kind of what we've all come to love now, which is all of our houseplants. Now, before I get any further, and a lot of people are going to be like, I want to see plants. This is not a video for you. I'm not going to be showing a whole bunch of plants in this. I will be talking you through the history. I'll be inserting clips and photos throughout this video just to kind of paint a bit more of a picture, because to be fair, we all need to know where this madness all started from, I think. It will help us better understand and appreciate what has come before us and what there is in the future of our community. The best place to start is kind of the very beginning of what I could find. I'm sure things happened before this era, but I want to touch a bit more about the Victorian era, where you'd get things, if I'm not mistaken, called Wardian boxes or Wardian glass houses. And essentially, from what I've been able to see, these were kind of very, very early stages of what we might now consider a terrarium. Or even you might consider it a kind of greenhouse, glasshouse situation as well. So if you kind of cast your mind to kind of Victorian parlours, these Wardian cases, these kind of early versions of terrariums and old greenhouses, this is kind of where, at least in modern history, the kind of houseplants trend started. And the way that I understand it is some of these kind of tropical plants back then came over, because we need to touch on a bit of colonization at this point, but came over from locations where these plants would be growing naturally. And as things tended to happen back then, and they still do, trends happened, which meant that all of these lords and ladies are just like, oh look, Lord, and all I've got now is the name Bridgerton in my mind, but it's not Bridgerton, but you know what I mean. It's Lord Farquaad, there we go, has got this beautiful plant. I have never seen it before. I must have it. He cannot be the only one that has it. I need to be part of this trend. And that's how a lot of the demand first started for some of these tropical plants, which a lot of the times did not grow, at least if we're talking about Victorian England or Victorian Britain. They didn't exist natively here in any way or form. They were coming over from what, in essence, if I'm not mistaken, were conquered lands even back then, or at least kind of early stages of all of that. So that's kind of a bit of the dark kind of beginnings of kind of what houseplants might have happened. Don't get me wrong, as I said, there was probably people before that were taking plants probably from the garden and possibly trying to grow them indoors, with varying levels of success, I would imagine, because a lot of the plants that might be growing outside won't do as well indoors, usually because of light levels. And this was the crux of a lot of the tropical plants that we kind of have come to love, is that by and large, they tend to be heavily understory plants, which means they don't need quite as much light as a lot of the garden plants that you might have in your garden that need full light in the garden, which you were never going to be able to achieve in a household condition. But during this time as well, there was kind of elite gardening clubs. Think of all the lord and ladies that would be sitting there and trading plants with each other. Early stages of Pokemon cards, before that was even a twinkle in somebody's eyes. So they'd be sitting there going, oh, I've got this really beautiful plant. You've got that beautiful plant that I want. Let's trade. And let's see if I can get your beautiful plant and you can get my beautiful plant. Yes? So it was a lot of that, and that was kind of the early stages. I mean, you can kind of look at it as the very, very first and earliest form of plant swaps, really. But the way that a lot of people look at that time, barring the obvious kind of cultural issues, there was a note of kind of romanticism and like, look at all of these exotic things that we've never been exposed to before, and we get to look at all of these beautiful, pretty plants now. But also there was that level of kind of huge exclusivity, because this was only done by people that would have the influence or the wealth to be able to be part of that kind of trend of tropical plants. And then quickly fast forwarding to the mid-century modern era, so think 50s and 60s, that kind of post-war era where you would get a lot of the houses in the 50s with a lot of plastic in them. And you know the aesthetic that I'm talking about, and that kind of notion that we sometimes get now when you're watching sitcoms or TV shows where it's all very kind of like, oh, the A-line skirts and the wife would stay at home and take care of it. She would be the homemaker and the husband would go off to work. Things have changed a lot, thankfully, for the better since then. But you can imagine during those kind of situations that there was a bit of a resurgence of plants, and they at that point were available more to the masses. Like you would have a strong architectural plant somewhere within that kind of mid-century modern aesthetic as well. Think of it as the rise of the potted pothos or the dracaena or the philodendrons, those big statement plants that you can put in your space and just go, look, it looks pretty. Look at me, I have got the new cool thing. Because that was the time when a lot of it was, there was a lot of excitement, there was a lot of advancement that was happening. It was post the World Wars, and there was a lot of people that were going, let's embrace new things, let's embrace new technology and make us the cool new kids on the block. Everybody was trying to be the cool new kids on the block. Can you see a pattern and a trend happening here? Like there was that kind of keeping up with the Joneses and trying to out-cool each other by having the fanciest kind of like sofa set or the fanciest fridge, or look at this fancy huge plant that you don't have in your house but I have in mine. This was also the time of kind of homemaker magazines and kind of DIY propagations where people were just trying to figure out what was happening. So they'd be reading these kind of old, well, it wasn't old back then, it was kind of like new and trendy. Look at all of these kind of like magazines that we can read and learn things, and it's not a dusty, musty book. And they'd be kind of trading some of the kind of propagation and DIY propagation, how you would do it. I would love to get my hands onto some old articles and magazines that had some of those early days of kind of like, this is how you would propagate a philodendron. And then you would kind of see, and I'd be really curious to see how much of that matches up with what we're doing now. And keep in mind, this is what I always say, there is no shame or shade to doing things your own way, because let's be abundantly clear, there was nowhere near as much research and kind of like lived experiences that we all have now back then. But guess what? They were still propagating things successfully. Granted, there might have been a bigger failure rate, but they were still achieving it. So that does say something, that even some of the things that we think now might be a bit weird worked back then. Might have not have worked perfectly, but it still worked. It also highlights the tenacity of the tropical plants that we all love, is that a lot of the times, even in less than ideal conditions, they can thrive, which is why I always say a lot of the times the plants that we have possibly within our collections, probably in their natural habitat, are weeds. But tenacity and the willingness to kind of survive and live and thrive and multiply is very strong with these plants. This was also the time of kind of the unsung mail order kind of nurseries, where people could get some of these plants that they might not be able to find locally. And it would make sense, like you would kind of get to order some of these plants via the post. That was probably some of the earliest days of being able to get some of these things to yourself, and it would be from these nurseries. I would imagine there was probably a lot of people selling seeds. Whether some of these seeds were real or not, you don't know. But for the oldies here amongst us, I'm including myself in this, we do all remember the mail order magazines that you would flip through and just go, I want this. I send you a check and then you send me the thing that I've purchased, and that would take forever basically. But yes, that would have been the earliest stages of that starting. And then if you kind of cast your mind to that kind of Bohemian, botanical and kind of counterculture of the 70s and the 80s, where you would get, imagine kind of those spaces, those internal spaces, and how people might have been decorating in the 70s and 80s, and then using the plants as a form of expression. So, you know, those kind of very boho chic apartments and houses that you might get in the 70s with like these ginormous ferns in those spaces, because it was a form of their self-expression. This was the time of kind of the beginnings of macrame hangers. The lava lamps were obviously big during this period as well. And as far as I could tell as well, and I did not know this until I was doing research for this video, there was like hand-typed zines. So I'm assuming there was some form of kind of like magazines, but instead of them going to print, it might have been things that people were typing and kind of sending off. I think, I might be wrong, if anybody was around during that time and kind of has any memory of this, and I'm talking utter rubbish, tell me down below. But these things were very cool, and that was a different shift in kind of how houseplants were kind of affecting us as kind of a culture, as a community as well. And as I just talked about before, like plant ownership was more about self-expression then. It was less of that kind of Victorian and the kind of postmodern kind of, you know, oh, let's kind of go with whatever the Joneses have got, and the thing to outdo each other and must have that, and like the trends of it all. But it was more of like, I'm gonna do my own thing. Look at this weird and kooky plant that signifies that I am also weird and kooky. So it was a different time, and plants were, I don't want to say consumed, but used and kind of enjoyed in a different way back then as well. And also because of this kind of zine or magazine culture and kind of the word of mouth, this is probably where you'd be getting people that were like neighbors talking to each other going, oh, I've got this plant as well. What are you doing about this? I'm doing this. Is this working for you? Possibly this might have been the time where some of the weirder hacks that have been around for donkey long may have started, because people were just, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to try everything. I guess it would have been things like that. So I'm thinking of things like the use maybe of mayonnaise as a leaf shine, because I know that's come up several times. And keep in mind, I have met people, because I know this triggers a lot of people, I have actually met people, probably slightly older, actually some of them relatively young as well, who have done this and have been doing this for years, and they have no problem. They find that it works really well. And this is the beauty of that kind of word of mouth things, because I'm just thinking, this might seem weird, but if it works, congratulations, keep doing, like, I'm not going to be here to judge, and I don't think anybody should be judging anybody's care, because some of these things have been around for a long time. And it's not exactly like back then you would have been able, and I know that not everybody agrees with this generally, but you can buy things like leaf shine. So they had to make do with whatever the hell they had. And if they had a tub of mayonnaise and the mayonnaise worked to do exactly the same thing, then I'm going to use do you see what I'm going with this? Like, use what you had around you. And this is where that human one-to-one interaction, where they'd be talking to the neighbors and going, oh, I did this and I did this. Like, did this work for you? No, okay, but does this work? I can try this as well with my plant. And this was people getting a bit more into the care of plants, rather than just getting things as a status symbol or just because everybody else had it. This was also the time when a lot of the university clubs were starting off, and they were starting to preserve some of the more rare specimens, some of the stuff that wasn't available by and large to a lot of other people, but they were taking the first tentative steps in order to preserve these plants, whether that be within their own glass houses or out in the field in the actual natural environment where some of these plants were growing. And then let's move over to something a bit more recent, like the 1990s and the 2000s, and the kind of, if you think of it as the forum era, I can never pronounce that word right. If I've said it wrong, do let me know there. Forum, I don't, I always struggle with that one, but you know what I mean. And this would be the kind of coming closer to what we're living now, where people would be going onto these forums. Probably the internet was very much still at the earlier stages, and you'd get forums like, was it Garden Web? You'd also need to be thinking of kind of early kind of email threads between people and just kind of going, oh, look at what I found. Do you remember email? Who's old enough to remember email threads? Because when I was doing the research for this video, that like triggered something in my like memories. I'm just like, oh no, oh, the email threads. And then you'd also get things like, so you'd have that, and then obviously the really like pixelated, you remember how those images used to load really, really slowly, and you'd be sitting there going, oh, but look, I can now consume pictures of what these plants that are nowhere near me, like they might be things that people have got available to them, I don't know, in Italy, and I'm based in the UK, and we're both experiencing plants that don't grow natively to us, but maybe Italy is getting some different types of plants that I haven't got over here, but look, that's really cool. Maybe we can get it over here. It was the beginning of that. And believe it or not, this would have been the beginning of also the digital plant communities, when people would kind of congregate together and kind of exchange stories. This would have been, oh, and I hate to compare it because I actually think the forums are probably less dramatic, but this would have been the beginning of, and would eventually turn into Facebook groups before all the dramas happened with all that. But it would have been a place where a community could be formed by people discussing plants, care, what plants somebody might have, plants that they might not have. It was the very early stages. And even some of the cult favorites, like maybe the Monstera adansonii, way before it became available to the masses, this would have been the earlier points where it would have started to get traded. Because yes, we don't think about it now, because generally Monstera adansonii, you can probably get it in most places, but back then it would have been something completely unique and special. Think of it as the time when the internet became its own kind of plant care archive. So where it all kind of started to pile on. Before the days that we have now, where anything you search about plant care, you generally will get kind of product listings from plant shops that are online. This was more of that time where it's becoming a bit more of an archive of information. But let's talk about some of the communities throughout all of these periods that helped grow that community even further and grow that knowledge more so than just kind of like what the white people were doing. So think about things like the marginalized keepers of these kind of plants. So you would then think of a lot of people that were coming in from other nations, so maybe the Caribbean or Africa, the queer communities. A lot of women were part of these communities. I mean, to be fair, looking at the communities now, those tend to be the pillars of the community generally even now. And they kind of act as a bit of caretakers for some of these plants throughout the years, essentially. And that's because there's a lot of cultural and emotional ties to the plants and the plants that they care for in general. So if you think about maybe an immigrant that might have been coming over from the Caribbean, they want to bring a plant with them that reminds them of home. Any one of us, and I count myself in here because I don't live where I grew up. I live in the UK now. I was born and raised in the Mediterranean. And I'm sitting there, I was so giddy with excitement when I was able to get a mastic plant, which is very traditional back home. It's not a thing here. And I was able to get it over here, and anybody that I've spoken to that has got roots away from where they are currently living, they get very excited. I remember years back now, I was talking to somebody from one of the Arabic nations who's lived here for a long, long time, and I was telling them about the mastic plant that I found, and they were just like, I managed to get a frankincense plant, and equally giddy, and I'm just like, see, it's that connection, and a lot of those communities brought that with them, and essentially provided this to the wider kind of world around them, because it was there and they were already doing it. They were the pioneers of bringing some of that strangeness that is strange for the communities that they're currently living in over from their own kind of background. And then we do need to talk about the kind of the darker side of the planty community as well. And you're talking about the guerrilla growers and the plant preservationists. And again, if you want to have a bit more of a deeper dive on the kind of everything that's entailed around that, I did an entire video with Fraser that I'll link at the top there, who's out in the field talking to some of these plant hunters. And you can get there's a few clips interspersed throughout that, granted quite substantial interview, but you can get a bit more of an understanding of even what is happening now. And yes, there are issues there, and yes, there are ethical and conservation issues. There always have been. And he explains it really well as to kind of, it's not always as black and white as people think it is, and the solutions are not as black and white as people think it is, because it's really easy for us all to be sitting in our comfortable living room talking about some of these things where the lived reality of those communities in those locations can be very, very different. So I do encourage you, do check out that video. It's very eye-opening for a lot of things that we assume are true that might not be. But these kind of types of hunters and the guerrilla propagators and all these things have helped kind of spur some of these things on. And I'll give you an example to a certain degree as well. So cast your mind not even that far back in like the current internet history, where Kelly Ellen might have been mentioning, for instance, the Monstera obliqua, Peru, and the famous saying, it's never an obliqua. So at that point, there wasn't that many obliqua Perus generally available to a lot of people. There were very small amounts of them available, usually in botanical centers, botanical gardens, not centers, botanical gardens. And there was issues. There were people trying to poach it from there and all these things when it started becoming a bit bigger. But look, in most plant shops now, this is a crazy thing about this, in a lot of the plant shops, right next to the Monstera adansonii is a true Monstera obliqua Peru. So it does happen, and it would have been those early, I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong, it would have been those early kind of guerrilla propagators in whatever way or form that might have done this. And there's a lot of cultural issues. I'm not going to unpack them all in this video, but we do need to kind of acknowledge that part of the evolution of houseplants as well. But then on the positive side of that, you've also got the kind of rescue and the private collections. Think about the more positive aspect of that. Think about people like Enid from NSC Tropicals, or even the kind of old school people that were part of the International Aroid Society. And I can't remember, this might have been an interview way back. It might have been with Enid, or it might have been somebody discussing this with some of the members. The International Aroid Festival or show, I think, that happens once a year in Miami now. And they were saying way before this became a big trend again, it was a whole bunch of aging kind of people like that were there, and they were geeking out on plants, but it was a very small kind of intimate kind of grouping, getting together and kind of like talking all these botanical terms, and then all of a sudden it boomed and it's become this massive thing now. And anybody who's been there, I think, over the years have noticed that there's been a bit of a struggle kind of going up, just like we've grown too fast from something that was very kind of pure and small and insignificant and maybe dying off a bit because it was just us that was still doing all of this stuff, and we were the bastions, to look at these thousands of people now wanting tickets, wanting to come there. What do we show them? How do we organize this a bit better? So it is part of all of that as well. And how did it all lead to today? So think about those old school magazines and zines and all of these things, the email threads and all these things. And the natural progression is what we're seeing now, Instagram posts. This, like plant YouTube as well. This is all the natural progression of how that all started and how it's ended up now, and it's become a bit bigger. Like finding rare houseplants in your local garden centers, in your local plant stores. We need to acknowledge that where we sit now in terms of the houseplant community is built on years of silent or kind of very muted dedication from generations way before us, that kind of means that we can have the plants available to us, the knowledge available to us, the information that we need in order to grow the plants the way that we're growing them now. So in summary, the next time you're watering your monstera, your anthurium, just take a second to appreciate the fact that you are part of a much bigger story of all of the people and communities that came before you to lead you to the place where you can do just that, watering your weird and unusual anthurium, taking care of your variegated monstera. There was a lot that came before that facilitated us to be where we are now, to be able to enjoy the kind of plants that we love, the community that we love as much as we do. So I encourage you on this video to kind of share some of your earliest plant memories down below. And there is no age limit to this as well. Like, I don't want everybody who's very, very young going, oh, I don't have any history. No, you have your own history and it's valid and how it all started. And for my older viewers as well, like, let's tell people how it was even back then. I'm like, there's some people that probably watch these videos that have never heard that damned dial tone sound. Sorry, I'm a millennial, so I'm still triggered by that. But let's share all of our stories below and maybe where the communities were found back then and where we got our information from back then. But yes, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.